If you're planning a vacation this summer 2025, here in the Orlando area, and you intend on being behind the wheel for at least some of that trip, driving between Universal, Walt Disney World, and Epic Universe, there are a few things that you need to be aware of. And I want to talk to you a little bit about them today because we have experienced some changes to traffic patterns. We've got some new interchanges that have been added here in this general vicinity. Some might impact your travels between these two places. And who knows, maybe you've been doing a little bit of recon, you kind of heard about these things and you want to know a little bit more. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk first and foremost about what it's like to drive between Universal and Walt Disney World and back again, just some basics for those of you who have never done this before and you're considering doing this as part of your upcoming vacation. We're going to talk about the addition of some divergent diamonds on Sand Lake Road as well as on Darrell Carter Parkway and how that impacts your trip. We're going to talk about a new exit that's been added to I-4 that could make things a whole lot easier for some of you. And of course, I want to give you a look at what it looks like to drive to Epic Universe if you've never made that trip before. So it's a lot to cover, but we got this, right? Okay, get comfortable, grab yourself something delicious to sip on, and let's get into it. So first, let's start with some basics for those of you who are maybe making this trip for the first time, driving between the Walt Disney World Resort and Universal Orlando Resort. So these two titans in the theme park industry are located somewhat close to each other, but it's important to note that they're not in the same neighborhood. It can be a to-do to get between the two. They're about 15 miles apart, depending on where you start your journey. Of course, don't forget, Walt Disney World is massive, so give or take. And what that translates to is roughly 20 minutes under the best possible conditions, but it can easily be 30 to 45 minutes, no matter which direction you're headed. And, when things get backed up, it can take significantly longer than that. There are three main routes that can get you between these two places. I-4, which is probably your best bet, even though it can admittedly be a nightmare. There's also International Drive, aka I-Drive. You can take this between the two places as well. And then your third option is Palm Parkway and Turkey Lake Road. Like I said, I-4 is going to be your best bet. It's the most straightforward route to Universal. It's also going to be the quickest route because while it can get backed up, so too can International Drive and the Palm Parkway Turkey Lake Road option. Now, as a brief little tip on how to make this go as smoothly as possible, my recommendation is to leave early. I know this is the same recommendation that I make for almost everything, but it really is the most effective way to limit the amount of traffic that you're going to encounter and get where you're going when you want to be there. Now, as another little tip or suggestion, at very least something to think about, is if you're planning on splitting your vacation between Walt Disney World and Universal, I highly recommend picking a place to stay that is closest to the place you want to be during the time that you want to be there. So if you're going to be splitting your trip between Disney and Universal, stay near Disney during the days that you want to do Disney, and then stay near Universal during the days that you want to do Universal. This is going to eliminate so much stress, it's going to save you so much time, and it's going to cut down on the number of trips you need to make on these routes, between the two places. No one wants to be making this trip, it's no fun. It just isn't. So stay closest to wherever it is that you want to be. I know that there are some people who are going to be like, well, maybe I'll stay between the two. We've tried to find a sweet spot between the two places, but honestly, it doesn't really save you any time because the traffic between Disney and Universal is so bad. So there really is no middle ground. Of course, if you have a suggestion, pop it in the comments down below, but we've yet to find one. Anyway, those are just some things that I think are worth considering, especially if you're going to be splitting your vacation for the first time. But okay, let's move on and talk a little bit about some of the changes that have come to this area, specifically around I-4. Like I mentioned, we have some interchanges, we have some new exits. First, the new exits. The exit in question is off I-4. It's exit 70, and it drops you near the Orlando Vineland Premium Outlets, which is a great place to stop in if you need to do any shopping. Quite frankly, if you need a new pair of shoes, or maybe you decide to do a fancy dinner and you need to get a new outfit for that. But it's also a great option if you want to check out the Character Warehouse, which we've talked about before. It's a Disney owned and operated outlet store that sells Disney merchandise at a steep discount. But the challenge up until this exit being added to I-4 is that if you wanted to go here, you had to get off like well after or well before the premium outlets. It was kind of annoying backtracking as much as you had to just to get where you were going. But this solves that problem, which I think is great. This is also supposed to alleviate some traffic in the Disney Springs area. You know, that Disney Springs exit on I-4. That's yet to be seen, but who knows? Maybe it'll work out. We also have 2 new interchanges. Now, this is where things get a little bit tricky because this is something that not everyone is familiar with, not everyone's encountered before, but don't worry, we're gonna take a close look here in a second. So one of these interchanges is on Sand Lake Road, the other is on Darrell Carter Parkway. Now again, whether or not you're going to encounter either of these is going to depend on where you're coming from, where you're headed to, but it's important to be aware of them. Now these 2 interchanges are called a divergent diamond, and the point of these interchanges is to allow free-flowing turns when entering and exiting the interstate, eliminating the left turn against oncoming traffic and limiting the number of traffic signal phases. According to everything that we've been told, the goal of these divergent diamonds being added to these 2 areas, you know, Darrell Carter Parkway as well as Sand Lake Road, is to kind of alleviate some of the traffic on I-4. Whether or not that will happen is still yet to be seen. Now, I will say, if you're driving this for the first time, it can be a little bit confusing because you're like crossing traffic in a way that doesn't really feel natural, especially if you've never done this before. But another reason that this can be really confusing is because people aren't familiar with this type of traffic pattern. And so especially when there's a lot of traffic, people are trying to navigate the area, but it's unfamiliar to them. And so they sometimes make silly mistakes. And I will say from personal experience, both Russ and I have taken these interchanges a few times now, both the one on Sand Lake Road as well as Darrell Carter Parkway more recently, because that's the one that just opened. And yeah, it can be really confusing, especially when more people are sharing the road with you, especially with some of the markings. Some of it's kind of confusing, especially on the one on Darrell Carter Parkway. So if you find yourself taking this route, it's important to slow down, pay attention, and give some people some grace because it's new to them too, whether they're a local or whether they're a tourist. Now, like I mentioned a little bit ago, and like you may have heard if you've been looking into this and hearing what the news stations have to say, this is supposed to alleviate traffic on I-4 and allow things to flow a little bit better. But is that what we're actually seeing? The short answer is no, at least not yet. And I think it's important to not gloss over that fact, you know? There's a lot of excitement that sections of this major project are finally being completed and that improvements are being made to this like nightmare scenario that is I-4, but in reality, it's not really changing as much as some people will lead you to believe. So when you're planning your trip, when you're deciding whether or not you want to stay near whatever resort or do a split stay like I suggested earlier because traffic won't be so bad because of these new things that were added, not necessarily. But all right, I want to talk about one more thing before we go, and that is what it looks like to make your way to Epic Universe from the Walt Disney World area off I-4 because, you know, maybe you're headed to Epic. It is important to note, especially if you're doing this for the first time, which a lot of people will be because Epic is so new, that Epic is not located at the Universal Orlando Resort. And I think that's an important thing to note. I know that it's technically the same thing, you know, and people will be like, oh, well, it's only however many miles away. And that's true. But when we talk about Universal, those 2 parks are located walking distance from one another. Epic Universe is not. It's a whole separate location. So make sure that you keep that in mind during your planning process. So there are, of course, a few different routes that you can use to get to Epic Universe, but today we decided to take the same route that we would have taken if we were going to the Universal Orlando Resort's original campus. The only difference is instead of going left, we made our way off to the right, and that's going to lead us down the road and ultimately onto this big circular road that you've probably heard a little something about. People have been talking about this as kind of a great way to alleviate some traffic as well. Now, this was my first time taking this road, and just as an initial impression, very easy to understand. I could easily tell where every turn was going to take me, which is wonderful. It makes things so much easier, especially if you're not familiar with the area or where you're headed, which so many of us aren't because Epic is so new. Also, as a side note, I did kind of pull off in the next available like shopping plaza that I came upon because I wanted to like situate myself before moving on with my day. And it ended up being a shopping plaza that we visited the other day that I said might be a great option for a place to stay if you're going to be visiting Epic because it's so close. I can confirm that I do think that this is a great option because it is like incredibly close to Epic Universe. I said that before looking at the map and being like, oh, this is close to Epic, but I actually drove from Epic to this shopping plaza today. I couldn't believe how close it was. So if you want more information on that, kind of a little brief overview on what's available, go check the description box down below. I'll link that video there so you can watch that as well if you're thinking about an off-property like vacation rental area to maybe consider. But yeah, I think that pretty much sums up everything you need to know if you're going to be driving between Universal and Walt Disney World this summer. Again, we have some new interchanges, some new exits, and this route to Epic Universe if you're planning on heading out that way. As I mentioned earlier, you know, these changes aren't necessarily going to be a cure-all, and it's really important to realize that the construction isn't done. Pieces are done, but not everything is done. So we do have quite a ways before this has like fully come online, but some of these changes are definitely going to be helpful, especially for those of you who maybe are staying in the local area, off Turkey Lake Road, off near the Orlando Vineland Premium outlets. So make sure that you're using a GPS, you know, taking a second to look at what the route options are. Even if you're super familiar with a particular route that you're comfortable with, take a second and look at some alternatives now that you do have some alternatives available to you. But again, don't think that this is a cure-all. There's still going to be traffic. It's still going to be stressful. It's still going to be a little hectic. So anyway, let me know what your thoughts are. If this is something that you'll be encountering because of your like go-to places to stay or your go-to routes when traveling between these two places, I'd love to know your thoughts. Also, if you've encountered any of these types of interchanges before, let us know. And finally, what are some of your tips and tricks for someone who might be driving between these two resorts for the first time? Is there anything you think they should do? Is there anything you think they should avoid? I want to hear it. But that's all for now. I hope you have a great vacation this summer if you are going to be coming to the Orlando area. And if you do, make sure you let us know how it went. Until next time. Bye.